Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a historical narrative that goes back 14 centuries. Our goal? To impartially unpack the monumental political shifts that ultimately led to the tragedy of Karbala. Because, this isn't just a story about a battle. It is a meticulously documented account of a deeply complex political and ideological divide, one that literally still echoes in human history today. Okay, let's dive into this. How did an entire empire, which was desperately trying to hold itself together, end up fracturing in such a devastating way? To truly understand the massive stakes of this historical countdown, we have to look at the very foundation of its leadership. So everything really begins right here, in the year 41 Hijri on the Islamic calendar. This was known as ul-Jamat, or the Year of Unity. After years of political differences, a fragile peace was finally established through a treaty between Imam Hasan and Emir Muawiyah. The baseline was actually pretty simple. Unity and the preservation of life were prioritized over political conflict. This brought a massive Islamic realm under a single administrative center in Damascus. And, for years, there was a real semblance of peace. But then, an immense ideological shift completely disrupted that peace. Traditionally, leadership succession was figured out through consultation and consensus among prominent figures and elders. It was a communal thing. However, a brand new method was suddenly introduced: hereditary succession. Specifically, the nomination of Yazid to take over the empire. Now, prominent figures, including Imam Hussain, Abdullah bin Zubayr, and Abdullah bin Omar, objected. And it's absolutely crucial to note that their objection wasn't rooted in some desire for rebellion. It was purely on principle. They strongly believed that such a vital role simply shouldn't bypass the established consensus of the community. And this brings us to the breaking point. When Yazid took power in 60 Hijri, he immediately demanded allegiance from the prominent figures in Medina. The governor actually called Imam Hussain in the middle of the night to demand his pledge. Imam Hussein's response? Absolutely monumental. He said, "A person like me cannot pledge allegiance to a person like him." He viewed the leadership as a sacred trust of justice and faith, definitely not just some political inheritance. And he flat out refused to compromise. Section 1. Migration from Medina to Mecca. That incredible act of political defiance had immediate fallout. Pressure really started mounting in Medina. So, to prevent bloodshed in the holy city and protect its sanctity, Imam Hussain made the incredibly difficult decision to leave the city of his grandfather. He departed in the month of Rajab in 60 Hijri and arrived safely by the 3rd of Shaban, seeking refuge in the sanctuary of Mecca. But as we'll see, the political gears of the empire were already turning rapidly. Section 2. Kufa's Call and Betrayal. Now, what's really interesting as we shift focus here is the sudden political support pouring in from Iraq. We're talking about a massive influx of letters, thousands of them, sometimes bearing the signatures of entire tribes, just flooding into Mecca. The political landscape had suddenly shifted. Word of Imam Hussein's refusal had reached Kufa, a former capital, and the people there were essentially begging him to come lead them, promising absolute loyalty. But Imam Hussain was cautious. Instead of just rushing in, he sent his trusted cousin Muslim bin Aqeel on a fact-finding mission to verify all this political support. Initially, Muslim bin Aqeel saw massive backing, but the central government in Damascus reacted incredibly swiftly. Yazid dispatched a ruthless governor, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, to crush the Kufan rebellion using a very brutal playbook. First, he arrived under the cover of night, disguised to confuse the public into thinking he was Imam Hussain, and just seized the governor's palace. Then, he systematically threatened the tribal leaders, deployed a vast spy network using bribes, and ultimately arrested Hani bin Urwa, a highly respected elder who was actually sheltering Muslim bin Aqeel. It was a brilliantly ruthless suppression tactic. So the big question on everyone's mind at that exact moment in history was, will those thousands of Kufas who pledged their loyalty actually stand with Muslim bin Aqeel against this violent crackdown? Well, the answer is a stark historical tragedy. When Muslim bin Aqeel initially rallied the people, thousands surrounded the palace. But through threats, fear, and some heavy propaganda from the tribal leaders, the crowd just melted away. By nightfall, after evening prayers, Muslim bin Aqeel looked behind him and was completely alone. The fear had won, he was isolated, eventually captured, and tragically martyred alongside Hani bin Urwa. Section 3. Journey and Halt at Karbala. While that tragic shift was happening over in Kufa, Imam Hussain, completely unaware of the betrayal, was already making his way toward Iraq. He had left Mecca on the 8th of Zilhajj specifically to prevent any violence during the pilgrimage. On his journey, he encountered the famous poet Farazdak, who gave him this really haunting summary of the political reality. He said, "Their hearts are with you, but their swords are with the Banu Umayya," meaning the ruling dynasty. That perfectly encapsulates the complex, fear-driven reality of the time. The people loved Hussein for sure, but they feared the state's military power even more. Before even reaching Kufa, Hussein's caravan was intercepted by an army of 1,000 riders commanded by Hur ibn Yazid. But get this, here is a striking historical detail. Hur's army was literally dying of thirst in the scorching desert. Despite being intercepted by hostile force, Imam Hussain ordered his own camp to provide water for all 1,000 opposing men and even their horses. It is an incredible display of mercy in the face of imminent danger. Afterward, Hur forced the caravan to divert, eventually halting them at a barren land called Karbala. Let's move to and see how this builds over the first 10 days of the month of Muharram. The escalation is rapid. They arrived at Karbala on the 2nd. The situation tightened dramatically on the 7th with a strict water blockade. By the 9th, an attack was imminent but delayed. And finally, the 10th marks the deeply tragic day of Ashura. Section 4. Blockade of water in Karbala. To truly grasp the severity of Karbala, we have to look closely at the tactical decisions made by the opposing forces. I mean, look at the sheer imbalance of power here. Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad dispatched Umar ibn Saad with an army of 4,000 riders to completely surround Imam Hussein's incredibly small camp of family and close companions. We are talking 4,000 heavily armed men against just a few dozen. And on the 7th of Muharram, they executed a devastating tactical decision. Umar ibn Saad's forces completely blocked access to the Euphrates River. For 3 whole days, in the blistering heat of the desert, Imam Hussein's camp, which, remember, included women and young children, was plunged into severe thirst. It was a brutal pressure tactic meant to force a quick surrender. Section 5. Ashura, the Battle of Karbala. But surrender never came. The night before the 10th of Muharram, the day known as Ashura, Imam Hussain had actually requested a delay in combat solely so his camp could spend the night in prayer and reflection. As dawn broke on the 10th, reaching the climax of this tragedy, we see a fascinating study in human motivation. So the crucial point is this contrast. On one side, Umar ibn Saad's massive forces were driven by political pressure, strict state orders, and a deep fear of retribution from their governor. On the exact opposite side, Imam Hussein's tiny camp was driven entirely by patience, faith, and a steadfast refusal to compromise their core principles, even while staring down certain death. And right before the battle begins, we witness an incredible act of moral courage. Remember Hur, the commander who initially intercepted Hussein's caravan? Well, on the morning of Ashura, overcome by an intense internal moral conflict and realizing the ultimate stakes of killing the prophet's grandson, he actually chose his conscience over his career and political power. Trembling, he rode his horse across the battlefield and defected to Imam Hussein's camp, begging for forgiveness, which, amazingly, he was immediately granted. It's a profound early example of whistleblowing, of just defying the crowd to do what is undeniably right. But, unfortunately, the sheer momentum of the state army couldn't be stopped. Umar ibn Saad stepped forward, drew his bow, and fired the very first arrow toward Imam Hussein's camp. He called upon his men to be witnesses so he could prove his absolute loyalty to the governor. And with that single arrow, the point of no return was crossed, officially sparking the historic and tragic Battle of Karbala. Which leaves us with a profound, lingering question. How does a single military defeat transform into a timeless symbol? What happened at Karbala transcended politics completely. The unwavering stand of Imam Hussain and his companions became a permanent fixture in human memory. It became a universal blueprint for standing up for justice, no matter how insurmountable the odds might seem. It's an incredibly profound piece of history that genuinely continues to echo today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the history that shapes our world.